Off. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Donald Trump has called for unconditional surrender from Iran and warns the US knows where its supreme leader is hiding. But in a post online, the US president says they will not kill him, at least for now. That's despite Sir Keir Starmer saying he doesn't believe the US is about to join Israel's attack on Iran.
I sat next to the President for that 2-hour discussion as we were working through not just the issues but the statement itself.
So you're not worried about escalation?
I'm clear that we need to de-escalate.
But are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
Fighting between the two sides has continued for a fifth day. A man has been jailed for at least 39 years for the murder of his partner and a neighbour in Milton Keynes on Christmas Day. Jaswell Brown also attacked his own son and his neighbour's boyfriend after taking cocaine in Bletchley. Former pop star Gary Glitter will remain in prison after losing a parole hearing. Glitter, whose real name is Paul Gadd, was jailed for 16 years for abusing 3 schoolgirls. He was released 2 years ago but recalled less than 6 weeks later for breaching licence conditions. And yellow heat warnings have been issued for most of England. Temperatures are set to reach highs of 33 this weekend. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 41 points at 88.34. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.17. LBC weather largely dry and clear tonight. A few showers for northwestern Scotland and the Northern Isles, a low of 4 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. An end. A real end, not a ceasefire. What President Trump means by that, pretty clearly, is that whatever happens next, Iran can no longer have the means to create nuclear weapons. But those means are still there, buried under a mountain, and Israel has now gone so far in attacks and assassinations and the rhetoric of regime change, there is no way back. If Iran survives in its present form and is able to produce nuclear weapons, they will be used one day against Israel. Therefore, almost by definition, the Israel-Iran crisis cannot de-escalate until the nuclear threat is ended, either by negotiation or by further bombing, which would probably have to be done by the Americans. Now, as you heard last night from a senior Washington advisor, Kenneth Katzman, Trump's preference has been strongly for a deal. But can even he trust the Iranian regime? Confusion all round. Keir Starmer says Trump isn't going to go to war. The former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt says he clearly is. And in the last hour, the Vice President J.D. Vance said he might. And then Donald Trump himself waded in, addressing Ayatollah Khamenei directly. Let me read him out. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out. Kill, at least for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. At this point, let's just stand back and sum up. An autocratic regime prone to executions and torture. A regime wanting to get nuclear weapons and not so far away, armed with fearsome rockets. A regime seen as a threat to the whole region and which has oppressed its own people. A regime, therefore, which absolutely needs to go, because whatever follows can it possibly be worse? And then I remember my younger self. And I think, hold on, I have heard this before. These arguments are uncannily like those before the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of Saddam Hussein 22 years ago. Now, it's true that Iraq no longer threatens Israel or other parts of the Middle East, but that invasion provoked years of civil war, the hideous theocratic tyranny of Islamic State, and a country still mired in misery. The Brown University Costs of War project estimated that that invasion of Iraq directly caused up to 350,000 deaths, and indirectly perhaps 1 million more because of the collapse of infrastructure and healthcare and disease and so forth. Iraq today is a more peaceful country, but a very fragile one. ISIS cells and other militias continue to operate there. Power supplies are irregular, and there is deep poverty. And so I ask, what have we learned? After Iraq, are we quite sure that smashing Iran is the sensible and proper thing to do? I'm joined now by the Israeli ambassador to Britain, Tzipi Hotovely. Tzipi, thank you very much indeed. Ambassador, I should say, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Can I ask, first of all, directly, is Israel's intention to topple the regime in Tehran?
Absolutely not. I think that Prime Minister was very clear that we are after the nuclear program. We are in this military operation for one reason: to defend Israel, to defend the region, to defend the world, and to make sure that Iran won't have nuclear capabilities. Andrew, you know, this is not the first time we discussed the Iranian regime. And your country, the UK, was Israel's partner for many years in fighting this threat. This is not just a threat on Israel. I just want to quote that your head of MI5 and your chief of MI6 were clear that Iran is a direct threat to your own country, to British people, to the Jewish community here, to our own embassy. This is a radical regime that we know what they're up to, and they were about to have a nuclear weapon. And Israel promised in its establishment never again about the Holocaust, and we said we're definitely not going to bring on ourselves a nuclear Holocaust. And this is why we went into this operation in the last minute, but it was still possible.
You think you can trust this regime about which you have said so many fierce things, to give up its nuclear weapons and live peacefully alongside Israel? Isn't the truth that you need the regime itself to go?
I don't have a question. This is a bad regime. We don't have a dispute here. This is a regime that is prosecuting women, LGBT, killing women for not covering their hair. I mean, Masa Amini
there's not going to be an argument about any of that.
I'm just saying everyone knows what this regime is capable to. But from our point of view, the most important thing is they were in a point where there was a double threat on Israel. One was existential threat of the nuclear program. They were accelerating.
So this is only about the nuclear program.
It's a double threat. It's a nuclear program and a ballistic missile program.
Right.
And
you've taken out a lot of that.
Can I just explain that? Because I think many people don't get it. When people are wondering what happened on Thursday night, why Israel just striked with all its abilities in the skies of Tehran, they need to know two things. One, at that Thursday, it was when the IAEA clearly said Iran was breaching any signal and anything they were supposed to apply according to international agreements. So Iran was not playing along with the international community on the nuclear issue, clearly. And the other question everyone should ask themselves, why a country that it's quite a common knowledge that 60% enriching uranium is only for military needs. So how come Iran was doing it? Can they explain that? They couldn't.
Right.
And there was one reason. They wanted a military program and they enrich uranium in a level of 9 bombs that could destroy Israel.
Let's see if we can have more of a conversation.
Please, no, just people don't understand that. People just, in London, people don't understand
you've said this is all about the nuclear program
and the ballistic
missiles, and you've attacked a lot of the ballistic missile sites.
A third is already.
We both know that the centrifuges for the nuclear program are buried effectively underneath the mountain. Now, Israel does not have the capability, as I understand it, to destroy those. Only the Americans do. And therefore I come on to what President Trump has been saying tonight and yesterday. Do you believe the Americans are about to remove Iran's capability on nuclear missiles?
So the Americans, you heard all the statements today,
yes, I've read them out.
And I think the president can speak better than I do. He sees this regime. I mean, I will say what we're doing. He sees this regime as a regime that will never have nuclear capabilities as long as he is the president, and he agrees that this regime is dangerous and he will never give it the chance to have nuclear weapons.
So he's half threatened to kill Khamenei, or he said, "I know where you are." Is that, you think, just trying to spook the supreme leader of Iran into coming to the negotiating table, or is this the beginning of a full-scale American attack against Iran?
We don't believe in fake negotiation. What the Iranians were doing so far was misleading the international community that while they were negotiating, they were racing to a bomb.
How can you be sure this doesn't just go on?
We have a very clear aim under this military attack. And we want to have this military attack in order to not, the Ayatollahs not to have those capabilities. Once the capabilities are damaged, then we are in a different place.
But you can't get to the centrifuges, which are at the centre of all of this, the 60% that you were talking. You can't get them. They're buried inside
Andrew,
a mountain without the Americans.
I think people are quite impressed with what Israel did so far.
Yeah.
I think we quite amazed the world with what they're doing. And if I may do something for a second,
very briefly, because we're short of time.
The German Chancellor today was saying this. This is a dirty work Israel is doing for all of us. We are also victims of this regime. This Mullah regime has brought death and destruction to the world. This is the German Chancellor. You see in Europe leaders understanding that Israel is doing a huge service to this country because in the end of the day, the missile program is going to aim to London as well.
I'm trying to work out what's going to happen next, really. You've mentioned Britain being very, very concerned about Iran, which is absolutely right. And tonight, the Defence Secretary, John Healey, has said that we're sending Typhoon jets into the area to reinforce security and may also be used to help support our allies. Can I ask you, have you had any discussions with the British government that might lead you to think that Britain would get involved to help protect Israel?
The answer is no. They're not going to be involved in that. In the past, they were great partners of part of the defence coalition. We didn't ask anyone's help, honestly, from the British government. We are very clear that we are very happy that our friends from all around the world are supporting this very justified campaign against the most dangerous regime not to have the most dangerous weapon. And we didn't ask their help. And we are allies in intelligence cooperation. We do a lot of things together on security. But the UK is not involved.
All right. Do you think the UK is any longer a reliable ally for Israel after the sanctions announcement we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
We have a gap on many issues. And I must say that on Iran, there was never a gap. We always understood how dangerous this regime, and the UK government, whether it was Conservatives or Labour, always thought that this regime shouldn't have nuclear weapons. So this is where we agree. And I must say that I have a very, deep conversations with the prime ministers are talking, the foreign ministers are talking. So we have deep conversations to know where we're heading. And I'm sure the world will be a much better place after Iran won't have the capabilities to destroy Israel.
Why did Israel use drones, tanks and artillery to kill 51 people queuing for food?
You know, Andrew, this is something, you're speaking about Gaza now.
I am, yes.
So, first of all, we're shifting now to the Gaza war. In the Gaza war, we are in a point where I think when we win the Iran war, this is where we're going to have a huge opportunity to have a proper ceasefire in Gaza, because this is the patron of Hamas and all the proxy system they built for years around Israel. So I believe actually it will move us forward to a ceasefire in Gaza.
That's the expression of hope. I'm asking you why you are killing civilians.
We are not. We're not. No, we are. We're not.
It's the fourth such attack.
We're not firing. We're not firing on civilians. We're making sure.
I'm sorry. All the evidence is you are. The scenes in the hospital. Dismembered corpses, bits of children being brought into a hospital after queuing for food.
Andrew, again, Israel never targets children, civilians whatsoever. What is happening, that Hamas is the one who's firing on people and preventing it to get food because he's losing control on the aid system.
That is not what people there are saying. That's not what the rescuers are saying. The scenes inside the hospital at Khan Yunis are absolutely horrific. And these were people queuing for food at a food distribution point. I can't understand why they were attacked with drones and tanks.
Andrew, I just finished a conversation with other senior legal people in the army services. You know what he was telling me? He said, if the international community would have known how cautious we are and how we operate, how we check every single facility. And you know those hospitals are not hospitals. You know
they are. They're not hospital equipment.
They're used as military facilities. Oh, yes, Al-Shifa Hospital was a hospital? No, it was the headquarters of Hamas. You know that. And they were abusing the international community. The European hospital is where Sinwar was found just a few weeks ago, found dead because he was sheltering there instead of, being a brave leader, but he was underneath as a terrorist and he died as a dog because This is the type of people, they don't care about their own people, they don't care about aid, they were looting the aid. So we need to remember that. We need to remember that Israel is not targeting civilians. And this is after speaking to so many people in our system that they know we only target military targets.
Everybody around the world needs to know what's going on, needs to know the truth about these things. I just said that 51 people were killed by Israelis while they were queuing for food.
Not being targeted. They were never being targeted by our
they were
troops.
killed
I stand behind my words. They weren't targeted.
But if we were able to have proper independent journalists there, we'd both know what was the truth. Why won't Israel allow journalists to operate freely in Gaza? I
believe very soon, after we finish with the war in Iran, there will be a ceasefire and you'll be allowed to get into Gaza and to report as much as you want.
In Haifa, in Israel, a group of people were wearing T-shirts which simply read, "Stop the War." They were apprehended by the police and they were told that their slogans were illegal. That is not the kind of thing that happens in a democratic state.
I'm not familiar with it. People are demonstrating. You know something? My country was so famous for having demonstrations in the last 2 years, more than any other country in Europe, I think.
Well, it used to be.
We had cities in Israel full of people raising their flags. People are allowed to say everything in Israel, and as long as they're not inciting for terrorism. I believe that our country is the most democratic country in the world when it comes to freedom of speech, and the evidence is our streets.
Final question. Isn't the truth that Israel is trying to drive Arabs out of Gaza completely, and that your own ministers have said so much? I mean, Mr. Smotrich said earlier this month, Gaza will be entirely destroyed. Civilians will be sent south, and from there they will start to leave in great numbers to third countries. And he said that we are finally going to conquer the Gaza Strip. Isn't the project to remove Arabs from Gaza?
I don't think the 7th of October was an Israeli project. It was a Hamas barbaric attack. With all the respect, what we're doing is making sure that the southern communities of Israel will be safe forever and will never be confronting this type of barbaric invasion that Hamas committed as a war crime, as the worst war crime the Jewish state ever experienced. With all the respect, we didn't invent it 7th of October. It happened as a Hamas plan. It happened as a barbaric plan to kill our people, to brutally kill innocent people in their beds, and you know what happened the 7th of October. So every normal country would have made sure that this type of thing won't happen again. This is what Israel is doing. We want to make sure Gaza won't be a threat to Israel, and this is why we're operating for so long, paying huge price. I think the Israeli people are extremely resilient and brave by taking another step and another step of fighting evil, and we're doing that because we believe in this cause.
All right, Ambassador Hotovely, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to LBC. We're going to hear from a former chief of MI5 in a few minutes who's issued a stark warning to the Prime Minister. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, time now 6:17.
This is LBC.
Or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:19. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that President Trump had sent a direct message to the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, saying the Americans know where he is. They don't want to kill him yet, but patience is wearing thin. So what does that actually mean? And what does the president want moving forward? Someone who can help give us an insight is Fred Fleitz, a one-time CIA analyst, former chief of staff to the National Security Council under Donald Trump. Mr. Fleitz, thank you very much indeed for joining me. We are all trying to read Donald Trump's mind at the moment, as we so often are. J.D. Vance, the vice president, has said that he thinks he might well be in favour of an attack on Iran. What is your own view?
Well, I believe that Trump's preference is to avoid getting America into a new war, and he would like to pursue this through diplomacy. And I believe the door is still open to a diplomatic agreement to end the threat from Iran's nuclear program, which means giving up enrichment. Their enrichment program is a weapons program. I think the world has to acknowledge that. And he's made it clear that he gave Iran 60 days. He's a man of his word. And if Iran will not negotiate in good faith, I think Trump is seriously considering using bunker buster bombs to destroy its Fordo enrichment site, which was deeply buried inside of a mountain to make nuclear weapons fuel.
So the program has to be destroyed either by negotiation or by bombing. President Trump has said today that he knows where Ayatollah Khamenei is, doesn't want to kill him yet, but patience is wearing thin. Do you think that is intended to spook the so-called supreme leader of Iran into serious negotiations? Is that what it's about, really?
I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is leverage to get the Iranians to the negotiating table, to get them to negotiate in good faith. And if they go to the table, they could get a great deal for a peaceful nuclear program. They would be provided with fuel for a reactor and for radioactive medicines through a consortium, and there could be economic benefits. This is a real win for Iran's leaders, and I really hope they take advantage of it.
And yet the problem you'll have is that you don't trust them, and you don't trust them for very good reasons. And if that's the case, then in the end you have to take out the main nuclear facility, which, as I say, is buried under a mountain, and only America can do that.
Well, concerning trust, there's been disagreement over whether Iran should be allowed to enrich uranium, because you can enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, such as reactor fuel or making medicines. The problem is Iran has abused this technology to enrich huge amounts of uranium to near weapons grade with no peaceful applications. And that amount of uranium could fuel 9 to 10 nuclear bombs right now. Iran cannot be trusted with this technology. It's not worth arguing about anymore. If Iran has this technology, it is going to make dozens of nuclear weapons. And Trump has decided that's something he simply can't go along with.
And if a buster bomb is needed, that's what's needed. Fred Fleitz, thank you very much indeed for talking to me tonight. Now, we've been talking about conflict, but obviously if it's possible to prevent conflict, particularly in the Middle East, then that is better. And yet the government is cutting the budget used for conflict resolution to the despair of a wide range of senior intelligence, military and political figures who've written to Keir Starmer protesting about it. One of them is Lord Jonathan Evans, the former Director General of MI5, and he's with me now. Lord Evans, thank you very much indeed for coming in. This is quite an obscure part of the Foreign Office budget, as I understand it. So why is it so important?
It's important because it is much cheaper, much more efficient, and it helps our security if we help to prevent conflict rather than spending money to clear it up later. And the Britain has got a good history, a track record of success in doing this. If you look at what we've been doing in Nigeria, we've been working with the defence side in the Nigerian government, helping them to counter extremism, particularly in northern Nigeria, but also working with communities, strengthening communities and trying to build a community which can resist those threats. We need to do that.
I suppose the problem is that governments are all very aware of publicity in the public realm, and they also know that none of us cover things that don't happen, the wars that never took place. And that's the trouble, perhaps, with this budget. Can I ask you, however, former man in charge of MI5, about the threat of Iranian operations inside the UK? We've been talking for a very, very long time in this country about the IRGC and about the possibility of Iranian groups operating inside the UK. I've spoken to one of your colleagues who said that's what keeps him up at night. What's your own view about the seriousness of the threat here?
I think there is a serious threat from Iran. We know that the leadership there is committed to terrorism. We know from historically that they have been involved with terrorist groups and supporting terrorist groups, and we need therefore to be alert to the possibility that they do that in the United Kingdom. We have seen arrests in the last month or two which look as though they were something to do with the Iranian state. So in the same way that we are looking at threats from other countries such as Russia, we need to be aware that Iran might seem to do the same thing.
And where would you place Iran in, as it were, the bad hierarchy of threats?
Yeah. Well, I think we've got a hierarchy that seems to be coming together. Russia and Iran and China, all of whom are involved in interfering in our country, do coordinate their activities. We've seen that with what's been happening in Ukraine, and therefore I don't think it's helpful necessarily to say these are the first and second and third. What we need to recognise is that there is a combined level of threat, not that they're all doing exactly the same things, but all of them threaten us.
And of course, there's quite a big Iranian community inside the UK, very much focused on the opposition to the current regime, a lot of monarchists and others as well. But presumably, in all of that, there will be people who are actually working for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards.
It would be very surprising if the Iranians over the years had not tried to make sure that they had some form of capability in the United Kingdom. We are an open society. We're a society whose values are in contradiction to those of Iran. And of course, we have history with Iran over many years. So I would be surprised if there hadn't been those efforts. And maybe the arrests that we saw, we'll see what happens when it comes to court, are an indication of that.
And the fact that we are, as it were, trying to keep out of this conflict at the moment, we've been quite clear that's what we'd like to do. Is that partly because we don't want to be a target?
I think it's probably that we have many things on our plate at the moment. It's very clear from what the Israeli ambassador was saying just now that the Israelis have not sought our assistance. I'm not sure that they would need it. And therefore, from our point of view, we have other things that we need to be focusing on at the moment in security terms.
And coming back to, the letter that you and many others signed to the Prime Minister, there's been a big shift, as it were, from the aid budget into hard military power. Are you concerned that we are losing in all of that, however vital it is, soft power?
I think soft power matters a great deal, particularly in the long term. We benefit from our alliances. We benefit from the support of people who see us as a country that they admire, and we need to invest in that. I strongly support an increase in the hard defence budget, but the prevention of conflict goes alongside that. I mean, I'm currently chairman of the Halo Trust, the landmine removal charity. What we are doing in communities helps them, but it also reduces the risk of extremism. It reduces the risk of illegal migration, and those are things that threaten us back in the United Kingdom.
It is an almost impossible dilemma for this government because they need to put more money into hard defence. They need to put more money, I'm sure, into the intelligence services and into soft power as well. Do you think that in the end they're going to just have to put taxes up and grit their teeth and accept that?
Well, you'd have to ask a Treasury expert rather than an intelligence expert on that. What I would say is that we are calling in this letter for a ring fencing of a proportion of the aid budget, the remaining aid budget, to be put into conflict prevention and bilateral conflict prevention, because even though the total has gone down, we need to make sure that that percentage stays up.
All right, Lord Evans, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Appreciated. Now then, something we haven't talked about so far this week is a clear win for Britain and for Keir Starmer. He might have dropped it on the tarmac during the G7 summit in Canada, but President Trump has signed a UK-US trade deal which spared us from the worst of the threatened tariffs on, above all, cars. They cut the tariffs from those from 27.5% for the first 100,000 vehicles shipped to the US to just 10%. And that is a lifesaver for British companies such as Jaguar Land Rover. The G7 was kind of fascinating anthropology for politics watchers, I have to say, hosted by Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who won power partly by fiercely pushing back against Trump when he suggested Canada should become part of the US. They seem to get along all right now, but how is the presidency viewed from Canada now? Let's talk to the Canadian High Commissioner in London, Ralph Goodale. Ralph, thank you very much indeed. Did I call you Ambassador or High Commissioner? High Commissioner, I'll call you.
High Commissioner, it's effectively the same thing.
Same thing. OK, well, I'll call you High Commissioner. This was a big moment for your Prime Minister, for Mark Carney, and we were all watching very carefully. It seemed to some people that President Trump was still uneasy around Mr. Carney, and he did indeed leave early from the summit. We still don't quite know why. What's your assessment?
Well, it's important that all of the G7 leaders were there today or yesterday rather, the first day, because that's when the G7 leaders themselves were meeting, including a very important discussion last night on the geopolitical crises, multiple crises that are being faced around the world. Today is a larger focus on other leaders from around the world that are joining in the conversation. Still very important. Unfortunate that President Trump was not able to stay, but obviously there are other issues that are dominating the White House today, and he's in Washington dealing with them. Still, I think altogether for the 2 days of the work in Kananaskis, it will prove to be a very successful encounter.
And all that insulting talk about the 51st state and Governor Carney, has that gone away for good, do you think?
Well, it still seems to pop up every now and then, less so now than previously. I think it's clear that the Prime Minister Carney is developing a working relationship with President Trump and the United States. From the beginning, we've had three very solid objectives. Number one, absolutely unequivocally defending Canadian sovereignty, and we've made that abundantly clear. Secondly, creating a new security and economic relationship with the United States, because the old one is clearly over. The one that has dominated the scene for the 80 years since the Second World War, that has fundamentally changed, and we need to find something to replace it. It has to be effective, but it will not be the same as it was before the last number of months. And then thirdly, we're building out the Canadian economy, so on its own it will be stronger and bigger and less vulnerable and more resilient in the face of whatever any foreign power might try to do to damage that economy. We will stand on our own 2 feet, and very effectively so. And on all three of those fronts, Mr. Carney has obviously made tangible progress. There was more progress in the relationship at the beginning of the meetings in Kananaskis, where there was a direct bilateral between President Trump and Mr. Carney.
And of course, Britain is always dancing a delicate dance at this moment with President Trump, a slightly strange thing to say, but you know what I mean, in terms of Trump saying, he has this fantastically strong relationship with Keir Starmer, very, very fond of Keir Starmer, good working relationship, loves Britain. And yet at the same time, we have to stand alongside you. And it was interesting the King's visit recently, that he was, he clearly enjoyed that. He clearly feels very strongly about being King of Canada. How important was that inside Canada?
On objective number one, standing up, defending, articulating our sovereignty. The visit by His Majesty was very important. And of course, when His Majesty is in Canada, he is not the envoy of a foreign country. He is the King of Canada. So the head of state in Canada, performing the central constitutional function of opening a democratically elected parliament, which has the sovereign authority over all Canadian affairs. It was symbolically very important. The throne speech itself was fundamentally important because it laid out that agenda for building out the Canadian economy, for eliminating internal trade barriers, accelerating our regulatory process for big project approvals, investments in infrastructure and science and technology and innovation, diversifying our trade around the world as well as within the country. All of those things in the speech articulated by His Majesty. And of course, he delivered the punchline with great effect, quoting the Canadian national anthem, "The True North, strong and free."
The True North, strong and free. High Commissioner, thank you very much for talking to LBC. I always enjoy our conversations. Now then, just over the road from here, the House of Commons is preparing to vote on two highly controversial amendments that could result in the biggest shake-up in abortion rights for nearly 60 years. We'll be talking about that next. The time now is 6:34, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Donald Trump has warned the US knows where Iran's supreme leader is, but won't kill him for now. The president has called for unconditional surrender from Iran in the conflict with Israel on the fifth day of fighting. The Israeli ambassador to the UK has told LBC Israel is not firing at civilians trying to access aid in the Gaza Strip. Tzipi Hotovely has been speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr after reports 59 Palestinians were killed when Israeli tanks fired on crowds in Khan Yunis. And a man has been jailed for at least 39 years for killing his partner and a neighbour after taking cocaine on Christmas Day last year. Jaswell Brown, who's 49, also tried to kill his teenage son and his neighbour's boyfriend. Both survived. LBC weather largely dry and clear tonight. A few showers for northwestern Scotland and the Northern Isles. A low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:36. Big votes in the Commons this evening about abortion. There were more than 250,000 abortions in England and Wales in 2022, the highest number ever. Abortions are illegal, but they're allowed for the first 24 weeks of pregnancy and beyond. They have to be approved by 2 doctors, and recent changes in the law allow women to take abortion pills at home in the first 10 weeks of a pregnancy. Now, 2 Labour MPs have put down amendments in the Commons designed to stop police investigations of women having any abortions, effectively decriminalising abortion. The arguments have been going on all afternoon. I'm joined now by LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambre. Aggie, welcome. And a big demonstration outside the House of Commons by the anti-abortion movement.
Indeed, and actually it's something that a number of Labour MPs have brought up with me, that they were quite upset by the demonstration outside the Commons. And I think it speaks to what a difficult issue this is for a lot of people. Even those MPs who are going to vote for Tonia Antoniazzi's amendment are still realise that this is a big moment and also very difficult, because I think no MPs think it's a good thing to be having an abortion so late on. But the reason that some of them that are going to vote for this are keen to decriminalise it is they don't feel that is a deterrent, and they don't feel if you are criminalising the mother who is doing that in that sense, that is a good thing. But as you say, there are these 2 different amendments. One is called, this is Tonia Antoniazzi's amendment, that's called NC1. This is seen to be the slightly simpler of them both, and this would remove the threat of investigation, arrest, prosecution or imprisonment. And then there's NC20, which is put forward by Stella Creasy, and this would enshrine abortion access as a human right and also to prevent women who've terminated their pregnancies from being investigated. Now, the Speaker decided that not both of these could be voted on. Both of them are currently being debated, but the reason is he feels they can't both work together. So Tonia's is being voted on first. If that passes, which, having spoken to Labour MPs, sounds like it is likely to pass, Stella's won't be voted on. But I spoke to Stella Carisi earlier today, and this is why she said she believes her amendment is better.
So I understand where the people from Tonya's amendment are coming from, where they think that this is a country where increasingly there are these culture wars, so better to get this one thing through that will exempt women from prosecution. The trouble for me is that keeps these outdated criminal laws. So if Tonya's amendment goes forward, abortion will still be a crime in this country. Those laws will still remain on the statute book. And that means they can be exploited by those people who want to see restrictions in access and ultimately want to stop women having abortions altogether.
Now, one minister suggested to me that although this probably won't go through tonight, Stella Carisi's amendment, perhaps that could come back later as a private member's bill when the ground had been laid better. In 20 minutes or so, we should know whether or not Tonya Antonazzi's amendment passes, and this could be the biggest law change in abortion for 60 years.
Well, I'm sure everybody will carry on listening to LBC until they know what's happened in those votes. But for now, thank you very much indeed, Aggie. Now, different question. Should Britain withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, or at least push for it to be substantially rewritten? Even Labour MPs are beginning to ask these questions, and an example of why is the revelation that 2 fugitives from Brazil, wanted for murder and child rape, are being allowed to stay here under human rights law on the basis they might be mistreated in foreign prisons. The man who got that scoop is Paul Brand, UK editor of ITV and LBC presenter, and he joins me now. Paul, first of all, congratulations on this scoop, but it's a pretty grisly story.
Yeah, Andrew, it is. And the government is already promising action tonight. They'd already said they were going to review the application of the European Convention on Human Rights with regard to Article 8. That's family life. That is often involved in lots of the cases that get into the newspapers about foreign criminals, for example, being allowed to stay here because if they went back home, it would break up their family, etc., etc. Now they're promising to also review Article 3, which specifically is the problem in our investigation. This is the right to be protected from torture or mistreatment, including in prisons. And as you mentioned, what we have found is that Brazilian fugitives, and from other countries too, but we focused on 2 Brazilian fugitives, are coming to the UK, fleeing justice abroad, and then using the European Convention on Human Rights to stay here. And the 2 specific examples we looked at were a man who is alleged to have ordered the murder of a rival gang leader in Brazil, and also a man who is convicted of repeatedly raping a 5-year-old girl. That man stayed in the UK and reoffended. He committed further offences against children. In fact, both men were allowed to stay here under Article 3. And the question, as you say, that politicians are now asking is how do we deal with this? Does it feel proportional? Does it feel proportionate that we're protecting the rights of criminals or alleged criminals over the rights of children, for example, not to be abused by them?
It is absolutely infuriating. There are lots of people in politics, mainly on the right, who've said we just have to leave the ECHR if they carry on making us do this kind of thing. Is this beginning to cause a genuine change of heart, do you think, on the left and in the Labour government generally?
I think what's happening is this question around our membership of the ECHR is moving from a fringe issue into the mainstream. And Reform UK, as you know, and also Kemi Badenoch is leaning in the direction now of withdrawing from the ECHR. But what's also happening is you're getting voices on the Labour backbenches. 2 Labour MPs wrote an op-ed in the Times today, for example, saying not that they want to withdraw from the ECHR, but the way to counter that argument is to reform the ECHR, to ask the Council of Europe, that essentially oversees the application of the ECHR, to reform it so that it doesn't overreach, so that you don't get these bizarre cases where it feels as though things are out of kilter. And across Europe, there is a movement behind this now. 9 nations actually have written to the Council of Europe saying they want reform in this area. And that feels to me like the direction of travel in mainstream centrist left-wing politics, as well as the more hardline view on the right of politics.
Well, let's test this right now, Paul Brand, because with great journalistic elegance, I have one of those Labour MPs sitting beside me in the studio. He is saying that the ECHR needs to be reformed rather than abolished. Jake Richards of Rother Valley joins me now. Jake, you were one of the 2 who wrote this piece in the Times, and your argument was that if, as it were, centre politicians don't take this argument up, it'll be taken up by the far right. But actually, don't you think, given this kind of absolutely infuriating, abominable story that Paul Brand was talking about. Actually, the whole thing is ridiculous.
Well, look, I think the story that Paul has disclosed this week is just another in a long line of examples whereby people feel that this convention, our international human rights obligations, aren't working for our national interests. That's not just here in the UK. As Paul said, 9 European countries with governments on the left, on the right, have written to the European Council urging an open conversation about how we can ensure the convention suits national interests more. And this government agrees, this Labour government agrees. We know that, as you've announced, the Home Office are doing 2 reviews into the operation of Article 8 and Article 3 in the context of asylum claims, but also foreign offenders. Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, is today in Strasbourg having these conversations with our European partners about how we can make this convention work better for us. And it's worth stressing that the convention is, quote, a live instrument. It is designed to move with the times, to move with different social, economic, political context, and that's what it has to do now. And for those of us on the centre-left, those of us who believe in human rights, we have a responsibility to change it. And if we don't, we leave that space to the populist right.
It's plain, I think, to an awful lot of people listening that not only is it not working for the government, it's not working for justice, and it infuriates an awful lot of people. Rather than reviewing this article or that article or saying this bit doesn't work for us or that, surely the plainly obvious thing to do is to rewrite bits of it. And if there are European countries who agree with us, why can't we get together and get the thing redrafted and rewritten?
Well, I think we have to have a conversation to work out how we make this work for the modern world. Now, whether that is rewriting it, whether that is more complex legal notions about the margin of appreciation that each nation state has in terms of how it interprets its human rights obligations, there are lots of options. What we're calling for, and I think what the government are certainly have appetite to do, is begin those conversations with our European partners and the Council of Europe about how we make this work for the challenges in the modern world. And that's absolutely crucial.
We're obviously outside the EU. Does that make it in any sense harder for us to exert influence inside Europe to get this changed?
No, it's commonly misunderstood, but of course...
I know they're totally separate.
Separate.
We helped create this one.
And actually, look, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is playing a leading figure in Europe and actually on the global stage in defending Ukraine, in building trade relationships. It's one of the most impressive parts of what this government has done in the first year. And this is another opportunity for this Labour government, this Labour Prime Minister, who has a background in human rights, to shape human rights for the second half of the 21st century. And I think there is obviously an appetite in government for that. That's why the Justice Secretary is in Strasbourg. That's why the Attorney General's made a speech about the need to modernise international law, and that's why the Home Secretary is undertaking these 2 reviews.
There's a bit of a pattern here, isn't there? Reform, the Tories, the right of politics say one thing, Labour says certainly not, we're not going to have a national inquiry into the grooming gangs, and then, oops, yes, we are. And on this again, people on the right of politics have been calling for either reform or withdrawal from the ECHR, and suddenly you guys are saying, yes, we agree.
Well, I think...
You're being pulled to the right.
I don't quite accept that, because ultimately the evidence takes you to different positions, potentially. That's what's happened with Louise Casey's review on the grooming gangs, which has changed the position. And equally on this, when you have 9 European partners, including governments with our sister parties like the SDP in Denmark and elsewhere, urging the Council of Europe to look at this convention again, look at how it can work for the modern world, then I think it's incumbent on us in the UK to join that conversation. And actually, it was British lawyers who wrote the Convention of Human Rights in the aftermath of the Second World War with Winston Churchill, and I think it should be for the Brits to lead the charge again. And
you are a British lawyer yourself, but you're also a constituency MP, and you know very well that a lot of your voters find the ECHR absolutely appalling. They hate these kind of stories coming up in the papers, and they want change. And if you're going to win your seat at the next election, this is the kind of thing the Labour Party has to start to do, to listen much more acutely to some of what its basic, old-fashioned, working-class voters want.
We absolutely have to share the public's rightful anger at some of the stories like those in Paul's report earlier. And we have to
just remind people, a child rapist who was allowed to stay here because the prospect of prison in Brazil was too much, and then raped children here.
Absolutely, and these are disgusting cases, and it's incumbent on the government to try and fix the system. Now, why we're not advocating withdrawing from the convention now is because the convention plays a really important part, for example, in the unifying Europe against Russia. There's only 2 European countries who are not signatories of the European Convention of Human Rights. That's Russia and Belarus. If we were to unilaterally withdraw tomorrow, like Nigel Farage would want, and Kemi Badenoch, increasingly sort of desperate to mimic him, wants, then that would be disastrous. So look, we need to be sensible, pragmatic, but hard-headed, and that's what this government will do.
OK, Jake Rochers, thank you very much indeed. Now, a new podcast is uncovering mysteries surrounding the death of a British journalist and a Brazilian campaigner in the Amazon in 2022. I'm going to be speaking to the investigative journalist presenting that in just a few minutes, but the time now, 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Simon Marks.
President Trump says he's not looking for a ceasefire in Iran, so after agreeing to a G7 statement calling for de-escalation, is he about to escalate the conflict?
Simon Marks on LBC. Sun. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:51. In 2022, the Guardian journalist Dom Phillips and the Brazilian campaigner Bruno Pereira disappeared after exposing corruption that was threatening the future of the Amazon rainforest. The 2 men were found dead in one of the most remote areas of the jungle, and now the Guardian journalist Tom Phillips, who was a close friend of Dom's and was part of the group that discovered the 2 men, has launched a podcast exploring what happened to them, and it's called Missing in the Amazon. He first told me about the kind of person his friend Dom was.
Well, Dom Phillips was a fantastic British journalist and a wonderful guy who for many years worked here in Brazil as a reporter for The Guardian and for other newspapers in the UK and the United States. And he began his career as a journalist in the 1990s in the UK as a music journalist and was the editor of Mixmag, for those who can remember those days, covering electronic music and the hedonism of the 90s. And then moved to Brazil in the early noughties, reinvented himself as a news journalist, and increasingly moved into environmental coverage and became a real specialist on the Amazon, where he was in 2022.
And he worked very closely with a man called Bruno Pereira, who was a kind of advocate for the indigenous people, the tribes, as it were, of the Amazon.
Yeah, Bruno was one of the leading lights of the Brazilian indigenous protection movement. And Dom had met him in 2018 on an incredible expedition that the 2 of them went on for weeks into the Javari Valley, which is one of the most inaccessible parts of Brazil and has the highest concentration of uncontacted indigenous peoples anywhere on earth. So they went there looking for these groups to try and find a way of protecting them. And that was how their friendship formed.
And at some point in this story, they're on a boat together and they go missing. And your podcast follows the trail from there, really. But there's something that you say very interestingly in the podcast is that, we think of the Amazon as a huge natural resource. We know that it's facing deforestation problems. We know that it's under threat. But what I didn't know is you say it is also the sort of front line in a multi-sided war zone. Explain a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. I suspect most listeners will never have heard of the Javari Valley region of Brazil. It is one of the most remote parts of the country, right up against the border with Peru, very hard to get to. And in recent years, the Javari River, which runs from west to east towards the Amazon River and out towards the Atlantic, has become a major drug corridor, particularly of Peruvian cocaine. Peruvian cocaine production has soared in recent years. And so this cocaine is moved through the indigenous territory, along the Javari River, out onto the Amazon River, into, we now believe, narco submarines, which carry it across the Atlantic amazingly for weeks to Portugal and Spain.
Let's just stop on that. So there are submarines in the river which then head out onto the Atlantic and end up in Europe?
Yeah, just a few days ago, Brazilian federal police found one of these submarines on the eastern tip of the Amazon, either waiting for a cargo, I think, or having returned from a trip. And that is used to smuggle these drugs across. So people say that if you are now using cocaine in a major European capital or somewhere in Europe, it may well be that that drug has passed along the Amazon River and been carried across the ocean in a submarine.
And the drug gangs are the natural enemies, presumably, of the indigenous people whose territory this is. But there's also the deforesters, the loggers, the prairie farmers who are moving in as well with the support of the Brazilian government. So it's a complicated situation.
That's right. I mean, all manner of environmental criminals have poured into the Amazon in recent years, and particularly during the 4 years during which the far-right former army captain Jair Bolsonaro was president from 2019 to the end of 2022. And he was accused of stripping back environmental protections, indigenous protections, policing, and leaving the region open to these groups from southeastern cities in Brazil like Rio and Sao Paulo, who have moved in and started operating in illegal gold mining, of course, drug trafficking, but also deforestation and ranching.
Now, this is, as I say, a gripping podcast, and I encourage people to enjoy every twist and turn of it. But we have to get to the end. What's happened to Dom and Bruno?
Well, Dom was on what would have been the final trip for the book he was writing, How to Save the Amazon, which was recently released in the UK and the US, and is being released here in Brazil this week. And it was the final research trip, and he was going to spend time with indigenous activists who were seeking, under Bruno Pereira's leadership, to protect the Javari Valley, which is the second biggest indigenous protected area in Brazil. It's huge. It's the size of Scotland. So he had gone to one of the main entrance points to the Javari Valley indigenous territory to talk to these people, and he was coming back with Bruno early one Sunday morning when they went missing.
And what happened to them, do you think?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I know. I mean, I received a call about 24 hours after they went missing on a Monday morning here in Rio at my desk, and initially thought, my goodness, well, you know, those of us who know the Amazon know that things can go wrong. Your boat can break down, you can get stuck in the mud, you could spend weeks stuck out in the jungle. Communications are very hard. Shortly after, I got on the first of several planes and boats to get to the region and joined the search a few days after they'd gone missing. And we were out there in the jungle for several very difficult and painful days, trying to search for clues about what might have happened. And then on the Saturday, so 6 days after they disappeared, we were on with one of the search groups, and we were called across the river to a small area of flooded forest. And we found their belongings, their clothes, which had been in backpacks and trousers and tarpaulin that had been concealed under the water in an attempt to hide what had happened. So it was a very difficult time. And then a few days later, their bodies were discovered nearby.
Terrible, terrible crime. Now, this story, this part of the world, and the narrative that you've been exploring could make you just totally depressed and negative about the future of Brazil, the future of the rainforest, and the future of the indigenous people of the area. Are you depressed, or is there anywhere in this a flicker of hope?
No, there's absolutely a flicker of hope. I mean, it's a terrible story. And unfortunately, it made international headlines because Dom was a foreign journalist and Bruno was such a high-profile character within Brazil. But the reality is that these kinds of crimes are happening all the time and have happened for many years. The flicker of hope was the flicker of hope that I saw on the search for them, the 10-day search, where these indigenous activists who are fighting tooth and nail to protect their land worked night and day in very difficult terrain, facing all kinds of threats to find Dom and Bruno, to find out what had happened. And they continue their work. I've just come back from a trip just over a week ago with the same group of activists I met 3 years ago to another very, very remote part of the Amazon. And their numbers have grown. There are more of them doing it, and they are working week after week after week to make sure that their homes, which their peoples have inhabited for hundreds and hundreds of years, are protected, independent of the government that's in power.
Well, we all know whose side we're on. Was anyone ever brought to justice for this? Do you think they ever will be?
We do, and we are waiting to find that out. There are currently 2 fishermen in custody awaiting trial, the men who have confessed to shooting Dom and Bruno on the river. But there are also widespread suspicions that there are more powerful forces at play, bigger characters involved perhaps in organised crime, in illegal fishing, perhaps even in illegal drug trafficking. So we are waiting to see if there is full justice for them, and also justice for the indigenous people who live in that region and have been facing this kind of attack for generations and generations.
A gripping, grim story. Tom Phillips, thank you very much for joining LBC to talk about it. Fascinating stuff. Before I go, however, I just want to clear up that at the end of my interview with Jake Richards, I said that one of the Brazilian nationals in Paul Brand's story about the ECHR had committed further child rape in this country. That was wrong. It was in fact offences relating to downloading and sharing child abuse images. I'll be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But for now, it's time for Simon Marks.
Thanks, Andrew. Coming up tonight at 9, we're going to talk about protests.
Move out of the way! Move out of the way! Mate, we can't go to work!
Remember when furious drivers tried to clear the streets of Just Stop Oil demonstrators? Those scenes could return after the government backed down in its battle to preserve tougher anti-protest laws after the Court of Appeals overturned them last month. How far should the country go to limit the right to protest? At 8, Cross Question.